name is Dr. Janelle Woodward, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning for the Pleasanton Unified School District. Thank you for attending this webinar with us. Before we begin, let's introduce our co-presenters who are members of the PUSD Teaching and Learning team. Joining us live this evening, we have Marta Graywall, Director of Secondary Education, and Winter Jones, District Career Readiness Specialist. Winter is also a counselor. During the presentation, if you have questions, please click on the Q&A icon and you may ask your question. We will have some time at the end of our presentation to respond to some of the questions. Questions specific to a particular college should be answered by that college, and specific student situations should be addressed privately with a school administrator or a counselor. Next slide, please. The purpose of this webinar is to review changes in the former college application requirement for standardized test scores, ACT or SAT. We want our students and families to understand the testing timeline if testing were to become widely available again in the future. And specifically, we want our students to know how colleges are handling the large number of test center closures due to COVID-19 pandemic. It is important that all seniors understand the college perspective of what it means to be test optional and test blind when it comes to the college application process. And we want to be able to support our seniors by answering frequently asked questions. Ms. Graywall, our Director of Secondary Education, will take the next few slides.
Thank you, Dr. Woodward. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, universities used a standardized test score as one small part of an overall holistic review of a student's college admission application. In addition to test scores, other factors considered by universities include courses taken, grades earned, extracurricular activities, essay prompts, and personal statements. Most colleges, including the University of California system and the California State University system, required one test score for admission, either the SAT or the ACT. The UCs required the SAT or ACT with a writing prompt in the form of a personal essay. If a test was taken more than one time, or if the student took both the SAT and the ACT, the highest score from a single test date was used. In other words, the highest score from a single sitting. Next slide. The CSUs required the SAT or ACT, but did not require an essay. If a test was taken more than one time, the highest score was used, but CSUs allowed what is referred to as a super score, which means that the highest scores earned on different sections of the test taken on different test dates could be combined to create the best overall score from multiple sittings. For a student with a CSU GPA of 3.0 or higher, which is calculated using the college prep courses taken in grades 10 and 11 only, no minimum test score was required, just completion of either the SAT or the ACT. Next, our Career Readiness Specialist, Ms. Winter Jones, will continue with the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to go over the former admission testing timeline for everyone listening. Typically, the PSAT or the NMSQT test, the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, would be taken in October of the junior year. And that is even if a student had taken it as an additional practice their sophomore year. So sophomores, it's okay to take the PSAT, but it's really designed for juniors, and we would have encouraged you to take it again as a junior because only a junior can qualify for that National Merit Scholarship. Students would then receive results in December from PSAT, and there's a nice interaction on College Board's website with your PSAT score results where students could look at the questions that they answered incorrectly and find out what was the correct answer. They could look at where they did well, and then they could participate in the partnership with Khan Academy, which is the official test prep site endorsed by College Board. Next slide, please. Then with those results and those months between January and March to prepare, a junior would take the SAT or the ACT for the first time in the spring of the junior year. That leaves the fall of the senior year for students to take the SAT or the ACT a second time. And colleges historically have always advised against taking the test more than 2 times. They don't want to see how many times you can practice the test to increase your score. They want to see you take it 1 time, and then if you want to, or if you feel that it's needed, take that test 1 more time. So that's why juniors in the spring, seniors in the fall. All colleges accept test scores through December with the exception of the impacted Cal States. There was a few impacted Cal States that wanted test scores done by October of the senior year, like Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, who we're going to hear from in just a little bit. It's very common practice for seniors to submit college applications before they test or before they have a test score available. And we'll talk a little bit in just a minute about colleges extending that deadline due to what's happening to test centers now. But I think sometimes students worry that they're submitting a college application when they haven't sat for their test yet. And it's very common practice for those test scores to follow, and always has been. Taking the SAT or the ACT too early could result in a student being tested on academics they haven't learned yet. And even if the student is advanced in math and maybe they're in Algebra 2 as a sophomore, and pre-calculus as a junior, you want to make sure that you're also through that first half of your junior English and you have some of that Algebra 2 and pre-calculus under your belt before sitting for those tests. So I wanted to talk about some terms that the colleges are using right now. Test optional is a term that you're going to hear a lot. And this is when a test score is not required for admission to college, but you may submit the test score if you have one. And we'll talk a lot about that in just a few minutes. Test blind means that even if you have a score, the college is not going to use it, not going to look at it as part of your college application. Many colleges ceased the requirement of test scores before the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is because more and more colleges are moving toward that holistic review of the applicants. And they're finding some of the tests to be biased and not necessarily the best measure of student success in college. So right now, the UCs, who have always done a holistic review, they had started this fall as test optional, meaning if you had a test score, you could submit it. Earlier this month, there was a court order in the state of California for the UCs to cease being test optional and to be test blind. The Cal States became test blind immediately at the onset of the pandemic. So right now, neither one of these public school systems in California is able to look at test scores as part of an application. For other colleges, the list of schools who are not requiring test scores is rising every day. And many of them are also declaring that they're going to stay test optional or test blind permanently. And we have a link here to a website called Fair Test. And Fair Test has been around for many years now, and they keep a running list of test optional and test blind schools. So you can look up any school on Fair Test and see what they're doing. You can also visit colleges' websites to see what they're doing. So there's a concern that being test optional doesn't really mean test optional. In other words, students feel like there still may be an advantage to having a test score. And tonight we wanted to share some information that we gathered from the colleges for you about what they're saying about that belief. Most of them are addressing that directly and saying absolutely not, a student will not be disadvantaged for not having a test score because they understand that not everyone can take this test right now. There's a link here that is going to connect to a doc. We're not going to go there right now, but this document goes over some of the most commonly applied to colleges for our PUSD students and what they have said about being test optional or test blind. And we'll be continuing to add to that list as we go forward. So now I would like you to hear directly from some college admission representatives that we had an opportunity to interview. We asked them a series of questions, and you're going to get to hear their responses.
Josh Mickelson, Assistant Director of Admissions Recruitment at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
I'm Paola Garcia, and I'm one of the Associate Directors at Santa Clara University.
Latif Legend, Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions, Stanford University.
I'm Maria Mendoza with Washington State University. I'm Admissions Counselor.
My name is Demetrius Chapman, Regional Admissions Manager here with Cal Poly, covering Northern California.
And our first question today is your college or university test blind or test optional for SAT, ACT?
The fall 2021 application cycle, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo will be test blind. That was a decision that was made at the CSU level.
And for Santa Clara University, we are going test optional for the next 2 years. So that would include this upcoming year and the following.
We haven't categorized it to say that if it was test optional or test blind, but basically we're leaving the decision in the applicant's hands whether they want to submit their scores or not. So we will be admitting students with no testing, and students that have tests, they will be admitted as well. So.
At WSU, we will be going test blind for the fall 2021 term and for students that are applying for the spring 2022 and spring 2021 term. Fall 2022 is still to be determined.
Next question. If your university is test optional and a student does not have an SAT or an ACT score, what factors will an admissions reader use to evaluate the application?
We are going to be using the rest of our selection criteria. So we do look at semesters of A through G coursework. We also look at an overall 9th through 11th grade GPA. And then we also consider extracurricular activities and work experience. So those will be the primary metrics that we'll be using when evaluating applicants.
Santa Clara University practices a holistic approach to evaluating all applications. So that means that we factor in GPA, rigor separately, as well as personal statement, letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, pretty much everything that goes into the common application.
We're just the same. We're committed to holistic admissions review for all of our candidates. The major factors, we look at academic excellence, intellectual vitality, extracurricular activity, and of course, context.
At WSU, we're going to be taking a look at the strength of a student's coursework and completion of those A through G. In Washington, we call them the CADRs for short. It is the college academic distribution requirements. Grade trends are going to be really important. We don't look at personal statements, letters of recommendation. Those aren't required for our application process. So the thing that's really going to weigh the heaviest for a student is going to be their academic merit.
No, I just think students could use this as an opportunity to pay attention to detail to how they're inputting the data, because I think a lot of students typically wait till the last minute and, making sure things are accurate because it's all self-reported. So that's one of the things I would reiterate is making sure they're paying attention, getting into the application early and not waiting until, Thanksgiving weekend.
Third question. What training, or is there any specific training that will be provided for admissions readers this year prior to the selection process, since this is a bit of a shift for a lot of your universities?
So for us, as I mentioned in our multi-criteria admissions process, we'll be looking at the coursework and the GPA and the extracurricular activities. So, really just reinforcing our training with our staff and advising those students through the process, and really kind of just making sure that we're able to communicate exactly the criteria that we're using and help students, understand where they might be able to make themselves more competitive in the process.
And for us, every year we go through a reader evaluation training at the beginning of each of the cycles, both for the fall admission and for winter admission for transfer students specifically, but we make sure to review our criteria and what we're looking for so that everyone is on the same page, especially since there are different raters evaluating applications, that we are all adhering to the same standards and criteria that we specified.
As far as this year, we have done some additional trainings, but it's nothing that's going to be significant because, again, we're still committed to just a holistic review. And so every year before the files are dropped and we begin reading, we conduct a rigorous training just to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
We have an entire team in our office that actually reviews application, and because we haven't required personal statements or letters of recommendation in the past, we're going to have a very similar process with the exception that this year we're test blind, so we're not considering test scores as part of the application. So we'll continue to review applicants and in a very similar manner to how we have in the past. I always encourage students to reach out to myself, to their admissions counselor if they're students from different areas, because we can definitely help them out to understand a little bit better what we're looking for in terms of just admissions in general.
I would actually reiterate with what Maria just said, which is that our process isn't changing with the exception of not considering test scores either. So, just kind of goes hand in hand with that.
This is our fourth question here. Are SAT or ACT scores required for any specific programs or scholarships at your institution, like WUI for our Washington State? And if yes, what can we share with our students who simply cannot get the test right now? What should they do?
So for us, again, being test blind, and our merit scholarships are all determined based on, the selection process and where applicants fall within the applicant pool. So for us, really, I don't know that question applies, but.
And at Santa Clara, we do review every applicant automatically for merit scholarships alongside with their application. But we are also test optional for those scholarships. So even if a student does not submit them, they will not be at any disadvantage for consideration for merit scholarships.
With the exception of our athletes, Stanford University is where we offer need-based financial aid. So everything in terms of the decision-making of how much scholarship a student should receive, it's based on the student's financial circumstances. So it won't, as far as their SAT scores or if they have them, it's fine, but it's not going to impact on their financial circumstances, which is going to determine what's allocated to the student.
Since Washington State is a WUI school, we don't consider test scores for the WUI or for our other out-of-state scholarship, which is our Cougar Award. So students that meet the eligibility criteria based on their GPA automatically get that. So we don't look at test scores specifically for those merit-based scholarships for out-of-state students.
The thing that came to mind was the EOP application. That's an important piece that we want to make sure students know. Like the CSU as a whole typically doesn't have an essay portion, but within the EOP, there are those questions that are going to be more about the specific individual, their identity, and how they've navigated their particular journey through high school. So just keeping in mind that, and as well as being able to have the letters of recommendation. And that's within the portal of the Cal State Apply. Once they go into that, then it will break out into the EOP application once they select Cal Poly and the other schools that have their own respective programs.
And just to clarify for our families, that Educational Opportunity Program is something that they can read about when they do the CSU application to see if they qualify. In light of our students who are feeling the need to travel out of state for a test score, do you have any thoughts about just this global pandemic and the safety? Any thoughts or concerns about students coming together into enclosed spaces to test for things that they feel like they need to test for?
From my standpoint, because we're test blind, that's something that, we're not requiring our applicants to submit any test scores. So that's obviously our primary concern is always the safety of our students and our staff, et cetera.
I would echo that. And in terms of that, I think safety and health should be the number one priority for students and families right now. And they should not feel that they need to go or make the effort to go out of state or anywhere else to take this test if indeed they cannot do so, especially for Santa Clara. Again, like I mentioned earlier, students will not be at any disadvantage for not having taken an exam.
I echo the same sentiments. Your health and safety is paramount. So you will not be disadvantaged if you submit if you're unable to take the test. So don't feel that you need to fly and risk your health and compromise. It's not worth it.
Also echo what everyone else has said about that. The health and safety of not only our students, but also faculty, staff, and everyone at the university is the most important thing. So because we are test blind and we're not considering test scores for scholarships, admissions, or anything, students don't really need to go out of their way to travel to a different state to take these exams.
What is your institution's plan for next year? And we know that all of our schools usually publish average test scores so that when students are developing their college list, they can kind of know where they fall. And for our current juniors, so any ideas about what may happen in the future?
At this point, I don't know that they have not made any announcements as far as beyond fall 2021. So, we're still waiting for that information from the CSU level. From the Chancellor's office. So that's currently, we know that we won't be considering test scores in our 2021 admissions process, but that's what I know for now.
We are test optional for fall 2021 and fall 2022. So even juniors who are planning already ahead of time on applying and looking at all those requirements, note that the same policy will apply for them in terms of submitting test scores or not. They don't have to feel like they need to plan that information out ahead of time already.
Yeah, there's no official announcements whether we're going to publish average test scores. But we are planning to reinstate the test for the following year. So for this year, you said it's completely optional if they want to submit the test. But the next year, the following year, we will utilize the test as part of the admissions process.
I don't unfortunately have any information just yet for the fall 2022 term. All I know is fall 2021 is test blind. I do believe we'll have a decision here over the next few months. So students and parents can definitely stay tuned for that.
If students do not have an SAT or an ACT test and they want to apply to one of your institutions, will they be disadvantaged at any way when competing against students who might have those test scores during the admission process?
We're not considering SAT or ACT scores in our admissions process for fall 2021. They will not be considered at all, regardless of whether students choose to submit them or not.
And for Santa Clara University, students will not be at any disadvantage if they do not submit test scores. We've made that pledge both on our website and with NACAC as well. So there's a list of schools with a kind of governing board for all universities that we will not disadvantage any student or penalize any student for not having submitted test scores.
Same thing with Stanford. There's no penalty or disadvantage of not submitting your tests. So for this year, it's completely optional whether the student wants to submit it. We're leaving that choice for the student.
At WSU, no student will be disadvantaged because we will not even be considering test scores for admissions, scholarships, or anything else. So, no, students, the short answer is no.
Joanne Lamb, I'm the Executive Director for the Research Assessment Accountability Partnerships Division here at Department at the Alameda County Office of Education.
So the first question, Joanne, is from your perspective at the county level, what is your sense of how important the SAT and ACT are for students in the college admission process?
You've heard from several different sampling of admissions officers for universities, and I would imagine that this is echoed through all of the universities that students might be thinking of applying to. If I have any takeaway, I think it really does speak to the importance of connecting with the admissions policies ahead of time so that students can develop a plan.
Are you aware of any changes that are upcoming with the College Board?
The biggest changes that I'm aware of when it comes to the College Board is really just making sure that we're getting all of the most up-to-date information on testing as possible. So I know that my staff, as well as I know that Pleasanton Unified and many other districts have been almost in daily or weekly conversations with the College Board, trying to get the most updated testing information as possible so that we are not having students go to testing sites that are closed or have changed or all of those pieces. So I really encourage everybody, students and staff, to really keep in contact with the College Board about the most updated testing site information that we possibly can provide so that we are keeping the safety and the well-being of our students front and center.
Okay, so we wanted to share some feedback from some other schools, and we have first Dartmouth. Dartmouth has said, College Board called upon its member institutions to offer flexibility in admissions this year to reduce anxiety for students. Now remember, College Board is the overseeing company of SAT, PSAT, and AP. So College Board has asked some of these schools to be flexible, and that's what we're seeing in their responses. It is a remarkable request that matches our remarkable moment. Optional is not a trick word, and students who do not submit test scores will not be disadvantaged. That's from the Dean of Admissions, Lee Coffin from Dartmouth. University of Washington, Seattle says at the UW, you will not be disadvantaged for sending low scores or for not sending scores. In fact, when reading your application, the reviewers will not see your test scores if they are provided. Historically, the SAT and ACT were a small consideration in the holistic review compared to curriculum quality and performance in courses. Sending test scores will not advantage you in direct admission to computer science or engineering at UW. For admission scholarships, test scores will not be required or considered. Harvard says the COVID-19 pandemic has created insurmountable challenges in scheduling tests for all students. Consistent with Harvard's whole person admissions process, standardized tests are only one factor among many. And we did hear from Stanford. Stanford says that they will review applications with or without standardized test scores, and there will be no penalty for not having scores. Yale says they are temporarily suspending its requirement that first-year applicants submit results from the ACT or SAT. The admissions committee will pay close attention to a student's high school transcript, letters of recommendation, and demonstrated academic drive and commitment. The staff at the admissions office understands that students will have many priorities when schools reopen. Completing standardized tests before the application deadline should not be among them. Cornell says, if you are considering or planning to take the SAT or ACT for the first time or to repeat testing again this year, please do not feel you need to do this unless you are able to take the exam locally near your home. MIT says, we have an ethical obligation to waive typical testing requirements under these circumstances. Students who have not already taken the SAT or ACT are discouraged from doing so if they cannot do so safely. MIT has a long-standing policy of not penalizing students for disasters and disruptions. Students should be community members first and applicants second. So MIT certainly can't in good conscience ask applicants to endanger their health or the health of the people around them by taking a test under potentially unsafe conditions. College Board and ACT announced year-long disruptions to administration and recommended that colleges show flexibility with their normal admissions requirements. So some frequently asked questions that have come up for us is, are there some colleges or programs who would like a score despite the pandemic? And there are approximately 4,000 colleges in the United States, not counting outside of the United States. So yes, there are some colleges or programs within colleges or scholarships within colleges that are asking for a test score. However, if you look deeply into their websites or pick up the phone and call the admissions office, most of them you will find are accepting letters or statements from students who cannot access testing right now. So with the focus on safety, community, and equity, how might it look to travel great distances to obtain a test score that's not required at this time? And we heard from some of the colleges about endangering yourself or potentially others by traveling great distances. They would like students to focus on their own health and safety, their own community, and on equity. What about the safety concern in having students sit for hours in enclosed spaces with dozens or hundreds of other students if and when the test centers open? This is something that is being considered by our state and our county all the time. And hopefully there will be a return to normal soon where it is safe for students to sit together. But the SAT and the ACT, they're very long tests. They take approximately 5.5 hours with instructions. And it would be very dangerous right now to sit inside an enclosed space for one of these long tests. How are colleges able to eliminate the test score requirement this year when it's been in place for such a long time? I asked myself that question. This has been part of the college application review for many, many years. And colleges are starting to release data showing that the test scores are not the best indicator of how students will perform on their campuses. And I think that's why there's been a pretty comfortable shift for the colleges during this pandemic to not requiring those scores. They're very accustomed to doing the holistic review, and they're starting to find that the best indicator of how successful a student will be once they get to their campus is not within the test score, it's within the other components of a student's application. And there's a link here to an article where you can read about the factors that they are considering to be more important, like courses taken and grades. They're finding that teachers are better judges of their students' ability than standardized tests. So those grades and those letters of recommendation. Now, counselors and students and parents and guardians within our community, we have long discussed the stress and anxiety that is caused by the college application process and sometimes the mystery around the college application process. So we hope we have demystified a little bit of that tonight. And we've long acknowledged that any shift in this anxiety that's surrounding this process would have to come from the top down. In other words, from the colleges to the high schools and so on down. And I think right now, in light of this pandemic, we are hearing from the colleges that they are shifting their process to relieve the stress and anxiety surrounding being able to sit for these tests as part of a college application. Here are some links to the college feedback chart that we have made for you, and the Fair Test website I mentioned. They keep that running list of test optional and test blind schools. And then we have an example of a holistic review process from the UCs. You can find examples of holistic review processes on many colleges' websites, all of them who use holistic review. We have a link to the court order that recently required the UCs to be test blind. The state acknowledged that it was not fair to have test scores be part of the application when so many students cannot take the test right now. And the UCs are part of our California public school system. So as far as equity, they are mandated by the state to be test blind. And then our Forbes article we were mentioning, it's very interesting about the large data that has recently been collected surrounding test scores and what they indicate about students. And we'll have our frequently asked questions posted after tonight when we gather and answer some questions for you. Here's the contacts for the reps who spoke on our video. These are our local reps to our area, to Pleasanton. So you are welcome to reach out to them with questions as well about their specific universities. And we did not see UC Berkeley on our video, but he is available for you to contact as well. Okay, do we have some questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Jones and Ms. Graywell, for that information. So the first additional question that we have tonight is, why are test centers closed in most places at this time?
So test centers are closed, and some of our students, unfortunately, are finding that they have a spot at a test center, but then they arrive there and it's closed at the last minute. And this is happening to students even who are traveling great distances to take the test. And I think what is happening is that all the institutions who offer the test would like to offer it, so they're keeping their centers open as long as they can until the very last minute. Of course, probably not assuming that students are traveling so far to arrive there for their test. So they think they're just canceling for their local community. But guidelines are very fluid at this time as new COVID cases arise or new information is learned about the spread of the virus. The same thing has happened to college campuses that tried to return too soon. As I'm sure you've seen on the news, COVID outbreaks occurred and colleges then had to rethink and restructure a return to campus. So in the meantime, students and faculty may have contacted the virus and become ill. So it's too great of a risk, which is why you're finding the test centers closing, and sometimes closing at the last minute. And as I said, everybody wants to host the test. But when it's determined that it's not safe, the centers are suddenly closing, and they may look around and see that they don't have enough space to socially distance people. They may have a lack of ventilation. The facility may not have been adequately cleaned. So the hosting institution has to weigh those risks against the large number of people that they're about to let in there.
Thank you so much, Winter. Second question. Are some colleges asking for test scores despite the pandemic?
Yes, and we talked a little bit about this. There are some, and then you will also find some who are using the test scores for certain scholarships or specific programs. And then other schools have said that they might be using the test scores for placement, so to determine what English class or what math class a freshman might be placed in. However, the scores for that are not required. Colleges will often give you their own placement test once you get there. But there are some programs out of state who are still requiring the score. And in that case, I think we have another question about what to do about that, Dr. Woodward. I saw in the Q&A.
Yes, yes. So let's go to we've got a series of other questions that we'll get to, and I believe that question will be answered throughout the evening. So what should I do if I don't have a test score and I want to apply for a scholarship or program that is asking for one?
I would recommend immediately contacting the admissions office at the college. Students, tell them you're very interested in applying for that scholarship or that program, and say, what can I submit in place of a test score? I live in Alameda County, California. We have a high rate of COVID cases, and test centers locally are not open. What can I submit instead of a test score? And I would highly recommend that students call admissions offices rather than parents and guardians. That shows your interests, your independence, etc. Ask them if they will accept a letter or statement from you. Ask them if they will accept a letter from a counselor, a teacher, or an administrator. Will they accept an AP exam score? Maybe you had an AP exam score from last year or the year before, or maybe you had a PSAT score from last year. Would they accept that, or even from sophomore year? And then next question, because I'm finding in talking to the colleges that many colleges who are requiring the score for some scholarship or program are extending the deadline for it. So instead of the score being due by October or November or December, they're saying, okay, February, March, etc. So I would also ask the admissions office, how late can an SAT or ACT score be submitted for that scholarship or program consideration? Because hopefully soon it will be safe to sit for a test and you might be able to obtain a score and send it in. And admissions at colleges are down since the COVID-19 pandemic. So you might see colleges going forward adjusting their requirements for the score, and you may also see them extending deadlines as long as they can.
Thank you so much for this helpful information. So just to clarify, what happens if I had a CR for credit or a NC for no credit from last semester due to hold harmless grading, and I also do not have an SAT or ACT score for admission? How might colleges view that?
Okay, so colleges are going to use the grades that you have. So for current seniors, you have your 2 semesters of your sophomore year. And when I say sophomore year, I'm thinking of the UCs and the CSUs who you typically use the 10th and 11th grade years. Other colleges, out of state and private colleges, they're also going to look at your 9th grade potentially, as they always have. That's not new that they would look at 9th grade. But for a CSU UC, students have 2 semesters sophomore year, their fall of their junior year, and then maybe in spring of junior year, you had a CR or an NC. A CR is considered passing. It is not factored into the GPA. And then an NC is considered not passing, but it is also not factored into the GPA. And the only time a student would need to make up an NC grade, which you may have done this past summer potentially, is if it was one of the courses required for admission to that college. So once the colleges use those grades to see what courses you took and how you did in high school, they're then going to go to that holistic review, where they look at your extracurriculars, your community service, your essays or personal insight questions. If it's a college that requires letters of recommendation, they're going to be looking at your letters of recommendation. If you have a job, they're going to be looking at how you held a job and all kinds of different factors going into that. And they know that you maybe were not able to sit for that test. If you're an athlete, they know that maybe you were not able to finish your sport last spring. And those are all things that you're going to be able to write about in the additional comments section on the college applications.
Thank you so much. So how will test-blind colleges have a space on the application for SAT or ACT scores?
Typically not. However, some of the colleges who are test blind might use the test score for placement. So if the college has a spot for a score and you have a score, you're welcome to put it there or not. Maybe you don't want to put it there if it's a score that you weren't pleased with. But if a test blind college has a spot for a score, it's typically going to be just used for placement and not in any part of the decision to determine whether or not you get to attend that school.
Thank you. Next question. Are students at any advantage if they do submit SAT scores?
Well, the colleges are saying no. They are saying that they're not going to advantage or disadvantage a student who has that score. Now, you will find a couple of colleges in the country who are calling themselves test flexible, meaning that they would like the score if you have it. But they're also promising that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they are not going to disadvantage a student who does not have a score.
Thank you. So in a scenario where 2 students are at the same level holistically, would submitting a test score help?
Well, if a school is test blind, no. because they're not going to look at the score. If a school is test optional, again, the colleges are saying that they will not use an SAT score to advantage or disadvantage a student. So they're going to be reviewing each application very individually and looking at that person as a whole, that student as a whole person. So that's the holistic review. Who is this student? What did they do in high school? What did they do in their community? And if a student was not able to sit for a test score, that is not going to hurt a student. A college cannot hold a student accountable for something that is impossible for them at this time.
Excellent, thank you. So what should students do if they took a test once and they want to retake it for a better score?
Well, in a normal year, colleges say, take it once, and if you want to take it a second time, go ahead and we'll take the highest score. In this year, I would only do that if you can do it safely and locally. So that would be something that may happen in the future, that test centers are reopened. I would not travel. You saw the responses from MIT, Cornell saying, do not go and take the test if you don't have a score. Do not go and retake the test for a second time if you cannot do so locally and safely. So just think about how the colleges may view that and your time spent. So students, is your time well spent right now traveling to a faraway location potentially to obtain a first or a second score, maybe endangering your health, maybe the health of others? And is that worth it, or is your time better spent focusing on what you have access to here in your community? And remember, you're going to get to tell all the colleges about how you made an effort to take the test and could not due to the circumstances, et cetera. And here's what you did with that time instead of taking that test. So we heard a lot from the colleges about community, safety, and equity. So think about portraying yourself to the colleges as a good citizen.
So I believe that this question has already been answered throughout the evening, but I'll go ahead and ask it again. Does test optional or test blind include SAT subject tests?
So most colleges in the country have done away with requiring SAT subject tests over the past many years. So nothing new due to the pandemic. There have been a few programs within schools that would still say, we need your math 2 subject test score, like for engineering at Berkeley or things like that. But the SAT subject tests are very rarely required. If they are required for a specific program, if a school is test optional or test blind right now, what they're acknowledging is that you don't have access to any SAT test, and that would include the SAT subject test. Now, as we had the question earlier, are there some colleges in the country or some programs within colleges who are still saying they want the score at this time? There are a few, and that's where I would say contact that admissions office, ask them what you can submit instead of that test, or if a score can come later, hopefully when you're able to sit for that test.
Thank you. Let's see. If test scores are not required, do colleges and universities still require transcripts and letters of recommendation? If so, what would be the process for submitting these items?
So transcripts are always going to be required. There's always a little bit of confusion in the fall with the seniors because the UCs and the Cal States and many other systems also allow students to self-report what's on their transcript. So the counseling departments at the high schools will get the student a copy of their transcript to use while they're doing those applications and self-reporting those grades. And they also have college application workshop nights, which will be virtual this year, but will still be happening, where they will assist students with entering their courses in those college applications. And colleges, those colleges that allow students to self-report, like our UCs and CSUs, they are going to ask for an official transcript in July of next year. So after you've graduated, they're going to get an official, and this will go to the one school that you have committed to. So you've been accepted by the school, and by May 1st, you have done your SIR, your SIR, your student intent to register, and you're coming to that school. You will then tell your registrar and your counselor at your school where your final transcript is going. And that's the first time the UCs and the Cal States will see that official transcript that should match exactly with what you have self-reported. So that's the first time they will see that. Students who are using the Common Application or Coalition or Send EDU, for some of our local out-of-state schools use Send EDU as a portal. So your counselor and your registrar at your school, in those cases, Common App, Coalition, Send EDU, or individual applications like MIT, Georgetown, those applications, when you're inviting your counselor onto your application, your counselor and your registrar at your school, they are uploading your official transcript for you. So you'll put your classes in, you'll report your classes, but then they will receive your official transcript from your counselor at your school. And then letters of recommendation was the second part of that question. When you look at your college applications, you want to see who is requiring letters of recommendation, how many, and from whom. The Cal States do not accept letters of recommendation except for that EOP, Educational Opportunity Program, which you can read about when you start your Cal State application. And then you'll get one for that. The UCs do not require letters of recommendation up front. However, a few UCs have gone to letting students know in November or December that they would like a letter from them. And then you have until about, I believe it's January 15th to have that letter sent by a teacher or a counselor. Now, the Common Application schools typically require letters of recommendation from teachers. So you want to read about how many, and then you'll invite teachers onto that link. And there's also a secondary school report and a counselor evaluation piece. And will invite your high school counselor onto that so that they can upload your school's profile, talking about how we graded last spring and how many AP courses we have, et cetera. And then your counselor will answer some questions about you. So you want to follow your instructions from your high school counselors on what they have told you to do to get that information to them.
Wow, that was a lot of information and excellent information. And just thank you. And just to echo that the high schools will be having additional college nights where more specific questions can be answered. Correct, Ms. Jones?
Yes, there's a UC and CSU specific college application night, but they also have started to cover the Common Application. And then at Amador, during the access periods, there's workshops and things that students can attend when they have questions or need help on their applications. Foothill has their flex time, where they will have help on their applications. And then, of course, that college application night where students can come in virtually this year with any college application that they're working on and have the counselor go through any questions they have on that application.
What a tremendous service and positive support for our students. Okay, this question is a hypothetical and we may or may not know the answer to this one, but we'll give it a go. Is it possible that SAT and ACTs will transition to online tests like the AP test did last year?
That is a great question, and that was actually a plan that College Board had. They were going to offer the SAT virtually. Unfortunately, they had some issues with the online AP courses, and I think they determined that there were too many glitches that they needed to work out before they roll that out. But I see that could be coming in the future for sure.
Thank you. Would a good test score earned prior to the pandemic no longer help my application right now?
That is another great question. So if a school is test blind, a good score that you had earned previously will not be considered in the admissions decision. But I know seniors that you have all kinds of other things to put on your application that is going to make that okay. The schools who are test optional will take a look at that score, and with all the other information you give them, they will balance that as they consider your application.
Thank you. If I go to a community college after graduation, will I be required to take the test later when transferring to another college? How might that work?
This is my favorite question so far. I love this question. So if you decide to attend a community college, there are over 100 in the state of California. They're amazing. You will basically do your freshman and your sophomore year there, taking all your general ed. You will not need a test score, not to attend a community college, and not when you transfer. They will be looking at the courses you took and the grades you earned at the community college.
And even if that's just after 1 year of attending a community college?
So typically, if you attend a community college after high school, you need to earn 60 units before you're eligible to transfer. And you transfer as a junior into your 4-year school. So it's not 2 years there plus 4 years at the university. It's 2 years and 2 years. So you basically, I'm so sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Janelle, can you repeat that question for me?
Absolutely. How about if I wanted to transfer from a community college after only 1 year?
Oh, thank you. Most colleges, once you have a certain number of units at the community college, they consider you a transfer student. So we have long cautioned seniors who have graduated and have accepted admission at a 4-year to be careful of what they take over the summer between graduation and the start of that school year, because if you earn too many units at the community college, you're considered a transfer student, and then in that case you need to get your 60 units, and that usually takes about 2 years. You can utilize summers and winter sessions and sometimes make it go a little bit faster, like 1.5 years, but it is typically 2 years.
Perfect. Okay, I'm pretty sure this has been answered tonight, but it was asked again. Are all the UCs test blind at this time?
Yes, the UCs, 3 UCs went test blind on their own before the court order, and that was UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, and UC Santa Cruz. And with the court order, they are currently all test blind at this time.
Thank you. And so it looks like a lot of that has been answered. Okay, here's a question. Should you use a lower test or the lower or the lowest test score on the application for college?
The lower or the lowest test score. So if you have a test score and you're able to put it on the college application because the college is not test blind, I think I could be wrong, but maybe this question is regarding the super scoring. Colleges are going to want your highest score. Some colleges require that score be from one date. That's what the UCs used to require before they became test blind. So you couldn't mix and match a math and a reading score from different Saturdays. And then some colleges super score, like the Cal States, when they accepted test scores, they super scored. So you could take your highest reading score and your highest math score from different Saturdays and put them together and make your highest score. Because those 2 institutions are test blind, I would suggest visiting the website of the college you're interested in and they will say on there if they super score. And if they super score, you can take the highest score from different days And if they don't super score, they will tell you on their website. They will say, we do not super score.
Thank you. If almost every school is test blind or test optional, why would anyone in the school district suggest to spend the money and go through this stress of taking an ACT or SAT?
We are hosting this evening to express and to share information with the community about how few colleges are requiring test scores or even looking at test scores, because we don't want students to jeopardize their safety by traveling great distances, or spending that time that could be better spent doing something else to show the college in their holistic review. So we are, that's the sort of the point of our evening, is that we would like students to know that they don't have to go through this stress or this cost or whatever it might be to obtain a test score, and they will still have access to the colleges that they would like to apply to.
Thank you. Okay, I think you're going to like this question, Winter, because we spent some time on this during the spring. Many high schools approach the spring 2020 grades differently. Will the CSUs and UC still figure in the spring 2020 semester grades if the students earned a grade during the spring?
So any grades that the student earned during the spring will be calculated into their GPA calculation. They will use any letter grades in the GPA calculation. And the California State Universities and the UCs both have said that they will take the CR, the credit, as a passing grade, and then that will not be calculated into the GPA. And the Cal States have recently said that any school districts who have stayed with that credit, no credit, or that pass, no pass going into the fall right now, those grades are not going to count for the CSU system. So I'm thankful that we are back to letter grades in Pleasanton Unified.
Yes, and we're thankful that our students are engaging in instruction every single day so that they can continue to earn those high grades that make us so proud. So for juniors this year, should they start preparing to take the test in spring? It seems like nobody is really sure what to expect for the 2022 admissions yet.
Yes, and there's a few schools I found in doing my research that have extended the test optional or the test blind for the class of 2022 already. And many of them are saying that they don't know yet because they have to see what happens. They have to see if the test becomes widely available again. So everyone's kind of adjusting on the fly here. But what I would recommend to juniors right now is if the PSAT becomes available to you in January, I would recommend sitting for that. You'll have your score back within, takes about 6 or 7 weeks to get your score back. And then if juniors can take a test in the spring and they would still like to, first of all, we'll have a lot more information back from the colleges at that point, who's going to remain test optional, who's going to remain test blind. But if the test becomes widely available and safe to take locally again, then juniors hopefully would have access to it in the spring. And then with that timeline that I was going over, that is the normal timeline. The only thing that would be different is typically the PSAT would have been in October instead of January. But this would be like PSAT January, juniors take the SAT, and then that still leaves the fall of the senior year to retake the test if the student would like to take it one more time. But keep in mind, most colleges say, take that test one time, take it a second time if you really feel the need, and then stop. They don't want to see students taking it 5, 6 times, etc.
Thank you. Once again, another question about community colleges. Do we foresee any impact of SAT or ACT testing on community colleges?
The community colleges don't require the test, and it's not required when students transfer from a community college either. So the test really has no bearing on the community college system. They don't have very much to do, they don't have anything to do with it.
Thank you. If a student takes the exam after they've already submitted their application, is there a way for them to update their application to include a score?
Yes, that is a great question that I love to answer, because as I was mentioning earlier during the presentation, it seems a little odd to seniors every year for all of the nearly 20 years that I was a counselor at Amador. It seems a little odd to students that they are submitting their college application, maybe their early action or early decision, and they're submitting that application by October 15th or November 1st. And their test score is, or their test date is in November or it's in December. And they're like, well, how can I make my deadline if I don't have my test score? So on college applications, there is a place to put your test date, and that test date might be in the future. So you're completing your application. Before, when you could take the test, you were putting in your upcoming test date, and then you were sending off your application, and your scores, you would send your scores officially from SAT or ACT after you took the test straight to the college, and then they would put that with your application. Now this year, with so many schools not requiring the score, I would recommend to seniors, submit your application. If you have a score and you're able to put it on there, there's a place to put it on there, and you want to put it on there, put it on there. If you don't have your score and you don't have a test date because the centers are closed, do your application, submit it. And then if you find a program or a scholarship that is saying on their website, or you call an admissions office and they're telling you on the phone, oh, you still need a score for WUI, or you still need a score for our engineering program, that's when you want to ask those questions and say, I live in an area right now where the test is not being offered, test centers are closing, what can I submit in place of a score? And then go through those things that I had talked about before.
Well, thank you very much. What a very informational evening that we have had together. Students, I hope that you have found this to be a beneficial night, because that is why we are hosting it. It looks like we're pretty much at the end of our Q&As right now. So staff will work on answering any other common questions that remain, and a recording of this webinar will be posted to the district website. And it will also be shared out in our weekly eConnect. We will follow up to answer questions that were not addressed during the presentation. There may be some that we cannot answer if they pertain to the College Board or other school districts. Thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you, Winter. Thank you, Namarta. And thank you to all of those who worked behind the scenes to make this evening possible. Have a good night, stay safe, and wear a mask.